In the early 1860s, abolitionist movements were gaining traction and more attention than ever in the North as the Civil War was at its peak. At the same time, racial tension was building as anti-war politicians and newspapers were instilling fear in white residents, particularly working-class German and Irish immigrants, that they would face more economic struggle as freed African Americans entered the workforce once emancipation occurred. Once it did occur, once emancipation was declared in 1962, many Northern Democrats protested, since they had joined the war effort not to free slaves, but to preserve the Union. A lack of enlistment on the Union side in early 1962 led Lincoln's government to pass a conscription law that subjected men aged 20 to 45 to military service. This draft, a match on an already charged drumble of economic insecurity, anti-republicanism, and white supremacy, ignited the New York City draft riots of 1863. Although by name the riots seemed to be just about a draft, they were much more about the economic fear and the anti-black sentiment bubbling among white pro-slavery Democrats who did not want to fight for freeing slaves. In this 3-day attack, some unknown but presumably high number of black people were among those slain ruthlessly on the sidewalks, at work, and in their own homes. The term draft riot subtly conceals what the event really was, a racially motivated and reckless homicide. William Henry Nichols, a teenager who lived in a building at 147 East 29th Street in Manhattan, is one of the few named victims of the massacres that took place between July 13th and 16th of 1863. Although there are no pictures of Nichols available, his life is captured vividly by his loving mother, referred to as Mrs. Stats in a record by the New York Times. William's father had died years before, and William, according to Mrs. Stats, by good behavior, with persevering industry, earned his own living. He was a communicant of the Protestant Episcopal Church in good standing. Nichols was living independently in Manhattan, and on July 15th, the day of his death, his mother was visiting from Philadelphia, unaware of the impending riots. William's story encompasses motherhood in the context of lynching, its sheer destruction on the lives of victims' mothers and loved ones. At 3 p.m. on July 15th, as mother and son enjoyed each other's company, rioters began forcefully entering William's home with stones, bricks, and pickaxes. Together, the pair witnessed the abuse of a new mother living in the unit, and subsequently the literal disposal of her 3-day-old baby out a window. Knowing that their rage was chiefly directed against men, Mrs. Stats recounts, "I hid my son behind me and I ran with him. Shielding her son with her own body, she went with him to hide in the basement. The two were suddenly facing a flood of water caused by the mob cutting pipes from above. Believing they were going to drown, they quickly managed to escape. As they tried to climb the fence, Mrs. Stats fell, and her son, higher up on the fence, jumped back down to lift her up. It was in this moment of bravery and love for his mother that the mob caught up to the teenage boy and grabbed him. As the mob surrounded Mrs. Stats and her son, William begged, 'Save my mother, gentlemen. If you kill me, save my mother.' Those were the teenager's last words. The men brutally attacked him, and he died in the hospital 2 days later. The mob robbed the mother, and she ran with other victims to the police station, where the captain at the station told her she was frightened without cause, and they were turned away. She was subsequently beaten by another mob before she went, bewildered and sick, in the direction of Philadelphia. She was found by a man, Arthur, who took her into his home, and there she was nursed over the course of 2 weeks back to health. There are Wikipedia pages upon Wikipedia pages about the white people involved in the massacre, the authorities, the politicians, and even the lynchers. But there is so little about the people who were killed, specifically those who were black. In fact, it was difficult to find and confirm online exactly how many were killed during the rampage. So few details are known about William Henry Nichols. His only legacy is that which his mother managed to create by chance, retelling the story of his death to the right person who could write it down to be published in a New York Times article later on. From the story, which is limited by the space of a single column and the impossible task of describing a whole entire human being in words, one cannot decipher his age, nor the details of his childhood, nor his interests, nor his relationships. However, from his mother's story we can extract elements of his character, his bravery, his love, and ultimately his fatal selflessness. His story is one of about 5 or 6 first-hand stories I was able to find about the massacre. So many mothers were unable to preserve the memory of their lost children. The riots are little known and largely assumed to have simply sprung up as a form of resistance to the draft. Professor Leslie Harris, author of In the Shadow of Slavery, African Americans in New York City, said, "One of the reasons why so much of this early Black history is not known in New York City is that the 20th century history, particularly the history of the Harlem Renaissance, which is this amazing flowering of Black life, has overshadowed a lot of the 19th century history of the New York City draft riots." She continues, "I think the reason it's not discussed and not widely known is that it really obscures the story of the triumphant North ending slavery, this idea that everyone in the North was unified in ending Southern slavery." William Henry Nichols lost his life on a hot summer afternoon to spineless white men, and as they stole it from him, as they took his ability to run, to fight back, to see, they could not steal his impact, that which accompanied his desperate concern for another. Without a face, without a backstory, without much more than a name and a story of his death, Nichols is a powerful reminder of the prevalence of white supremacy in the North and its devastating toll on Black Americans.